Have you ever wondered if the shadows in your room at night are just tricks of the light? Or if something far more sinister is watching you, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself? This first chilling account was shared by someone who experienced it as a child, a tale that has haunted them for decades, blending the innocence of youth with the terror of the unknown. I was about 10 years old, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the biggest excitement was riding bikes until the streetlights came on. The houses were all similar neat lawns, white picket fences, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or so it seemed. My parents worked late shifts at the hospital, so I often found myself home alone after school, which never really bothered me much at first. I'd come home on the bus, let myself in with the key hidden under the flower pot, and settle into my routine. The house was old, built in the 1950s, with those creaky hardwood floors that groaned like they were alive, and drafty windows that whistled when the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of the neighbor's barbecue or freshly cut grass. On sunny days, it felt cozy, filled with the warm glow of afternoon light streaming through the lace curtains my mom had hung. But as the days grew shorter in the fall, the house took on a different feel, darker corners, longer shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls like fingers reaching out. I'd make myself a snack, usually peanut butter on crackers, or a bowl of cereal, sitting at the Formica kitchen table with my homework spread out, the radio playing soft pop songs to fill the silence. I'd glance at the clock every now and then, counting down the minutes until I heard the familiar rumble of my mom's car pulling into the driveway, her headlights sweeping across the living room like a beacon of safety. But on this particular day, everything changed. It was a crisp October afternoon, the leaves outside turning shades of red and gold, crunching underfoot as kids played in the street. School had let out early for a teacher conference, so I got home around 2 p.m., earlier than usual. The house felt emptier somehow, the silence thicker, broken only by the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I kicked off my shoes, leaving them by the door in a heap, and headed to the kitchen, humming a tune from recess. That's when I heard it, the first soft knocking at the front door. It wasn't the usual confident rap of a neighbor dropping off mail or the cheerful ding-dong of the doorbell. It was tentative, almost hesitant, like someone wasn't sure they wanted to be heard, or perhaps like they were testing if anyone was home. My stomach did a little flip, but I told myself it was probably just one of the kids from down the block, maybe Tommy or Sarah, wanting to play kickball before it got dark. I padded over to the living room window, pulling back the curtain just a sliver to peek out. The porch was empty. No one standing there. No bike propped against the railing. Nothing but the swaying branches of the oak tree in the front yard. A gust of wind rattled the leaves, and I shrugged it off. Maybe a branch had hit the door, or perhaps it was the mailman who'd already left. I let the curtain fall back and returned to the kitchen, spreading peanut butter on my crackers with a butter knife that clinked against the plate. But then, just as I took my first bite, the knocking came again, this time from the back door. It was louder now, more insistent, echoing through the empty house like a demand. My chew slowed, the peanut butter sticking to the roof of my mouth as I swallowed hard. The back door was in the kitchen, just a few feet away, with its glass pane covered by a thin white curtain that let in diffused light. I tiptoed over, my socks sliding slightly on the linoleum floor, and peered through the edge of the curtain. The backyard was empty. The swing set my dad had built last summer stood motionless, the chains dangling limply, the grass still green but starting to brown at the edges. No one there. A chill ran down my spine, the kind that makes your skin prickle even in a warm room, raising goosebumps on my arms. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was a prank, the older kids from the cul-de-sac trying to scare me. I'd heard stories at school about ding-dong ditch, where you'd ring the bell and run. But this didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate, calculated. I tried to shake it off, turning back to my snack. But the house suddenly felt too big, too quiet, the shadows in the corners deeper than before. That's when the phone rang, shattering the silence like a scream. It was the old rotary phone on the wall, its bell jangling harshly. I jumped, nearly knocking over my milk glass, and stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice small and tentative. There was a pause, a crackle on the line, and then a man's voice, low and gravelly, like he'd smoked too many cigarettes. "Open the door. I have something for you." The words sent ice through my veins. I gripped the receiver so tight my knuckles turned white, my breath catching in my throat. "Who is this?" I managed to whisper, but the line went dead, just a dial tone humming in my ear. Panic set in like a wave crashing over me. I dropped the phone, letting it dangle by its cord, and ran to the front door, twisting the lock with trembling hands. Then the back door, the side door to the garage, every entrance I could think of. As I fumbled with the basement door, the one that led to the dark, unfinished cellar with its concrete floors and exposed beams, I heard scratching, like nails dragging across wood, coming from the other side. It was slow, deliberate, sending shivers up my arms. The air grew thick, heavy with a musty smell that hadn't been there before, like damp earth or something rotting. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The scratching stopped, but now there were whispers, faint, indistinct, seeping through the vents like smoke. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded like my name, repeated over and over. The house seemed to come alive around me, footsteps creaking on the stairs above, where no one should be, doors rattling in their frames, as if an invisible hand was testing them. I slid down the wall, hugging my knees to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. Time blurred. It could have been minutes or hours. I kept glancing at the clock, willing my mom to come home early. Finally, I mustered the courage to crawl to the phone and dial her work number, my fingers slipping on the rotary dial. I sobbed when she answered. "Someone's trying to get in." She told me to stay put, lock myself in my room. She'd be home soon. I did as she said, barricading the door with my desk chair, hiding under the bed with my stuffed bear clutched tight. The whispers continued, now from the closet, the window, everywhere. When my mom finally arrived, her key turning in the lock, everything stopped abruptly. The house was silent again, innocent. We searched top to bottom, living room, kitchen, basement, attic, but found no sign of anyone. No forced entry, no footprints in the yard. The police came the next day after a neighbor reported seeing a strange man lurking around our block, dressed in a dark coat, face obscured by a hat. They canvassed the area, put out a description, but never caught him. For weeks, I slept with the light on, jumping at every sound. Years later, I learned from old newspaper clippings that there had been a string of home invasions in the area around that time. A man posing as a delivery person to lure kids to the door. He was never identified, but the reports matched knocking, phone calls, scratching. I knew then that he'd been trying to lure me out, and if I'd opened that door, well, I don't like to think about it. From that day on, I never answered the door alone again, always wondering if he was still out there, waiting for another chance, another child home alone. The atmosphere in that old house lingered like a bad dream, a constant reminder of how fragile safety can be. But it pales in comparison to this next tale, recounted by a young woman who thought a simple walk in the woods would clear her mind, only to stumble into something that defied explanation and left her questioning the boundaries of reality. I was in my early 20s, going through a rough patch after a breakup that had left me feeling lost and hollow, like a piece of me had been ripped away. To cope, I decided to take a solo hike in the national park near my hometown, a place I'd always found solace in as a kid. The main trails were well marked, winding through towering pines and oak groves, with streams babbling over rocks and the occasional deer darting across the path. It was mid-autumn, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth, the ground carpeted in a mosaic of red, orange, and gold. The sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, warming my face as I set out, backpack slung over my shoulder with water, a sandwich, and a map just in case. The hike started peacefully enough. I followed the familiar loop, my boots crunching on the leaf-strewn path, my mind wandering through memories of happier times. Birds chirped overhead, squirrels chattered in the branches, and for a while, the weight on my chest lifted. But as the trail curved deeper into the forest, I spotted a narrow deer trail branching off to the right, overgrown with ferns and vines, but inviting in its mystery. Something pulled me toward it, a need for adventure, or perhaps a subconscious desire to get lost, to escape even further. I hesitated for a moment, checking my watch. It was only noon, plenty of time before dark, then stepped onto the path. The forest grew denser immediately, the trees closing in like silent sentinels, their trunks twisted and moss-covered. The air cooled, carrying a richer, earthier smell, and the sounds of the main trail faded behind me. I walked for what felt like hours, though my watch said only 45 minutes, the path wending uphill, then down into a small valley. The canopy blocked more of the sun, turning the world into a twilight realm of shadows and rustling leaves, where every snap of a twig made me jump. I paused to drink from my water bottle, wiping sweat from my brow despite the chill, and that's when I noticed the silence. It had crept in gradually, but now it was absolute. No birdsong, no scampering squirrels, no wind whispering through the leaves. Just the sound of my own breathing, harsh in the stillness. Your knees prickled at the back of my neck, but I pushed on, telling myself it was just a quiet part of the woods. Then, ahead, through a break in the trees, I saw it a small clearing with an old, abandoned cabin, its wooden walls weathered gray, roof sagging under the weight of years and fallen branches, windows shattered like empty eyes staring out. Vines crawled up the sides, nature reclaiming what man had left behind. Curiosity got the better of me, overriding the warning bells in my head. I approached slowly, the grass in the clearing tall and tangled, brushing against my legs. The door hung ajar on rusted hinges, creaking slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I peered inside through a broken pane, the glass jagged like teeth. The interior was a mess, overturned furniture coated in dust. Cobwebs draping from the ceiling like veils, the floor littered with debris. But something caught my eye, a fresh footprint in the dirt, just inside the threshold, too large to be an animal's, with the clear imprint of a boot tread. My stomach twisted into knots. Who would be out here? Squatters, hunters. I backed away, heart starting to pound. But as I turned, I heard a low growl, not from a dog or wolf, but something guttural, almost human, like a voice distorted by pain or rage. It came from the trees to my left. I froze, scanning the underbrush, my breath shallow. That's when I saw the figure tall, hunched over, covered in matted fur or ragged clothing, its form blending with the shadows. Its eyes reflected the dim light like a predator's, glowing faintly in the gloom. It was watching me, motionless, but radiating a menace that made my blood run cold. For a moment, we stared at each other, time suspended. Then it shifted, taking a step forward. Terror flooded me like ice water. I turned and ran, branches whipping my face, roots tripping my feet as I crashed through the forest. Behind me, I heard crashing footsteps, heavy and deliberate, gaining ground, accompanied by that growl turning into a snarl. My lungs burned, my legs aching, but I didn't dare look back. Thorns tore at my clothes, drawing blood, but I kept going, bursting back onto the main trail after what felt like an eternity. I screamed for help as I sprinted toward the parking lot, my voice echoing off the trees. A ranger on patrol found me, hysterical, babbling about the figure in the woods. He escorted me to my car, assuring me it was probably a bear or a homeless person, but his eyes held doubt. Later, at home, nursing scratches and bruises, I researched the park online and learned the area had a dark history, disappearances dating back decades. Hikers who vanished without a trace, locals whispering about a wild man or an escaped experiment from an old government lab hidden in the hills during the Cold War. Reports described a creature-like figure, elusive and aggressive, blamed for attacks that were covered up. I never hiked alone again, always feeling those glowing eyes on my back whenever I step into the woods, wondering if it's still out there hunting. As the sun set on that forest, casting long shadows that seemed to follow her home, the fear clung like fog, much like in this final account, where a routine night shift at a remote gas station turned into a nightmare that questioned the boundary between reality and madness, building a tension that still echoes in the teller's voice. I was working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of town, the kind of isolated outpost where truckers stop for black coffee and stale donuts, and locals fill up their tanks before the crack of dawn. The station was a relic from the 70s, with flickering fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects, shelves stocked with dusty candy bars and motor oil, and a single pump island lit by harsh sodium lamps that cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. The highway stretched out dark and empty in both directions, flanked by fields of corn that rustled in the wind like whispers. It was a slow night, the kind where time drags and you find yourself staring at the clock, willing the hands to move. I'd been there a few months, saving for college, and the solitude didn't bother me much. I'd listened to podcasts or read a book between customers. Around 2 a.m., when the world feels like it's holding its breath, a man walked in. He was tall, disheveled, with a wild beard and clothes that looked like they'd seen better days, stained jacket, mud-caked boots. His eyes darted around the store like he was being chased, never settling on one spot. He grabbed a pack of cigarettes from the counter, slapped down some crumpled bills, and muttered something under his breath before turning to leave without waiting for change. I thought nothing of it at first. Night shifts attract all types. But as he exited, the bell above the door jingling sharply, I glanced out the window and saw him lingering under the awning, staring back through the glass at me. His expression was unreadable, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Unnerved, I flipped the lock on the door. Policy be damned, we were supposed to stay open, but something felt off. Minutes later, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the hum of the coolers. I answered cautiously, "Jazz and Go. How can I help you?" There was static on the line, then that same gravelly voice, "Let me in. I need help." My blood turned to ice. I hung up immediately, my hands shaking as I set the receiver down. The power flickered then, the lights dipping into darkness for a heart-stopping moment before surging back. When they did, the man was gone from the window. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Then the scratching started at the back door, the one leading to the storage room and alley, like claws or fingernails dragging across the metal surface. It was slow, rhythmic, almost patient, as if whatever was out there knew it had all night. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the counter, its wooden handle slick with my sweat, and crept toward the sound. My sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor. The air grew colder, a draft seeping under the door, carrying a faint, metallic scent like blood or rust. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath, but the scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by whispers through the vents, indistinct at first, like wind through leaves, but then clearer, insistent, calling my name over and over. Jason, Jason. How did it know my name? I hadn't worn a name tag that night. Terror gripped me, my mind racing with possibilities: robber, prankster, something worse. I backed away, dialing 911 on the cordless phone, whispering my location to the dispatcher as the whispers grew louder, echoing around the store. The cops arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers with flashlights sweeping the perimeter. They found no one, no footprints in the gravel, no signs of tampering. But as they left, one pulled me aside, his face grave under the brim of his hat. "We've had reports like this before. Folks seeing things out here at night. Stay vigilant." That night, I quit on the spot, driving home with the radio blaring to drown out the silence. Years later, curiosity got the better of me, and I dug into the station's history. It was built on an old Native American burial ground, disturbed during construction, and former workers had reported similar hauntings, figures that vanished when approached, voices that knew personal details, luring people into the dark. The twist that still keeps me up at night. The man I saw matched the description of a local trucker who died in a fiery crash on that highway decades ago. His last radio call pleading for help before the flames consumed him. Witnesses said his spirit wanders the road, needing help from the living, drawing them into accidents or worse. Now, every quiet night, whether I'm at home or driving, I wonder if he's still out there, scratching at doors, waiting for someone to let him in, to join him in his eternal torment. These tales, each one a thread of dread woven from real experiences, build to a revelation that ties them together in ways I never expected when I first heard them. turning isolated incidents into a web of interconnected horror that spans time and place. It turns out, after digging deeper into archives and speaking with locals from each area, that all three locations, the suburban house with its lurking stranger, the forest cabin hiding its wild inhabitant, and the gas station plagued by its ghostly visitor, were connected through the forgotten history of a serial killer who operated in the region during the 1970s. Known only as the Shadow Man, in police files, he was a drifter who targeted isolated spots, using knocking, whispers, and lures to draw victims out, children home alone, hikers off the path, night workers in remote spots. He buried his victims in shallow graves scattered across the park and along the highway, their bodies discovered years later. The killer was never caught, vanishing after his last known crime at that very gas station, where he posed as a customer before attacking the clerk, who survived to describe him. But the true shocking revelation? Recent DNA evidence from cold cases linked the Shadow Man to a prominent local family, suggesting he might have been a relative of one of the victim's descendants, perpetuating a cycle of vengeance or curse. The manifestations, the knocking man, the wild figure, the pleading ghost aren't random. They're echoes of his methods, perhaps his spirit or copycats inspired by the legend, drawing new victims into the same traps. Knowing that, sleep feels impossible, as if the past is always lurking just beyond the door, knocking softly, waiting to be let in.